You have heard the address of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about the upcoming steps to tackle the oligarch corruption system, mounting resistance these days, but together we will overcome. We will overcome by pulling ranks of the Ukrainian politicians, Western allies, experts, and all of us. We have one more welcome address before we continue with our leadership panel. We have an address from the US senators that have recently visited Ukraine. They visited the territory of Luhansk and Donetsk regions and for themselves have seen the area of hostilities. Let us hear their advice. The US senators, Jen Shagan, Rob Portman, and Christopher Murphy.
Hello, I'm honored to join you virtually for the Democracy in Action Zero Corruption Conference. I'm also very pleased to be here in Ukraine with my fellow United States Senators Chris Murphy and Rob Portman. We want to send a resolute bipartisan message that the United States supports the people of Ukraine in fierce rebuke to Russian aggression. Ukraine has every right to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity against an increasingly belligerent Putin. As a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and chair of the European and Regional Cooperation Subcommittee, I will continue to pursue every avenue available to hold Putin to account and to reaffirm U.S. support for Ukraine to that end. We are proud to encourage Ukrainian leaders to continue efforts that will empower your nation's democratic institutions to help Ukraine achieve its goal of joining NATO and the EU. This event and its partnership with the Ukrainian government sends a united message that Ukraine is committed to taking the necessary steps to strengthen its democracy by making a firm commitment to root out corruption.
I joined Senator Shaheen in commending the organizers of the Zero Corruption Conference and the Ukrainian government for taking these important steps together to underscore the importance of addressing corruption. To me, corruption is one of the most serious threats to a democracy. By prioritizing a meaningful response to root out corruption, Ukraine and other countries of the region are setting an important example for other transitional democracies around the world as they work to solidify their institutions. These efforts will not only build a brighter future for the people of Ukraine and other countries involved, but it will further the relationships between our country and your countries. We share a special partnership, and your stability affects the United States' national security. Strengthening that relationship is important for both our countries. It also carries significant implications for our transatlantic community and for the world order. So thank you for what you do, and Godspeed.
I'm glad to have the opportunity to address the Zero Corruption Conference and echo Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman when I say that the United States is a proud partner to Ukraine in its right to self-defense against ongoing Russian aggression, which has frankly escalated in recent months from its intimidation tactics of increasing troops along the border to continued interference in elections and weaponizing corruption. The U.S. is committed to holding Vladimir Putin accountable for his myriad of transgressions that threaten the U.S., Ukraine, and other partners in the region. The Kremlin is counting on Ukraine to not be able to make progress on corruption reforms. And so that's why our visit here to Ukraine has been dedicated to trying to make sure that Ukraine, as well as partners throughout the region, continue to uphold the rule of law, continue to hold the corrupt accountable, continue to send a message to countries like Russia that the forces of corruption, the forces of malign influence ultimately aren't going to win the day. The United States is going to be a partner in all of these reform efforts, both with government and with civil society, to make sure that we protect and solidify democracies all around the world, and especially in the region. I'm so glad to be able to be a part of this conference.
This was a very open and a very specific address from our American friends and partners. Support has been announced for Ukraine. Will the support of the EU colleague be just as concordant? We have a special guest of our conference in the studio, the head of the Ukrainian service of the Voice of America, Myroslava. Greetings, Myroslava. You flew in from Washington just yesterday to moderate this high-level discussion. It's called Leadership in the times of restoration of the power of democracy. What are we to expect? I expected that we would talk to the President of Zelensky, frankly speaking, because we have a lot of questions about his leadership in the country. And as the sources say, he has a very important conversation coming up today, and he has to leave the studio. But overall, we will be talking about the key challenges for democracy, as they indeed are similar in the United States, in Europe, as they are in America, yet they differ. There are points we need to highlight. The question of freedom of speech and pressure on the media, the disinformation are among such points. We are working whether Ukraine and the countries of the region can truly integrate into the European countries and Euro-Atlantic space. These are the points we'll be discussing. We'll be talking about NATO, pressure and danger coming from Russia and other states. This is the focus of the discussion. We'll have a president of Moldova with us. We'll have the president of Deputy General of NATO and the representative of the Venice Commission. It's a very ambitious goal for an hourly conversation, but we'll have 2 more days to discuss the keynote remarks of your panelists. You must be following all the news and all the mentions of Ukraine in the American media. And President Trump compared Ukraine and equaled it to corruption. So how deeply rooted is this information and this perception of Ukraine in the American media, or did he fail? I don't think we need to link corruption and the statement made by President Trump, because there is major systemic corruption in Ukraine, which we should not hush up. We should expose it instead and seek ways to tackle it. The President assured us that he spares no effort to the end, but much more can be done, and some of the omissions also need to be exposed. Ukraine, in the overall context, is a country that has not fully unleashed its potential. Ukraine has had a number of opportunities. Ukrainians have died to live a decent life. They gave their lives for justice, and systemic corruption still remains in place, and the people are not enjoying prosperity and well-being, and we need to reverse it. Hopefully, the European partners can tell us what we can do to reverse the situation. That is the mission of a leader that Volodymyr Zelensky mentioned, that political leadership is what is needed, and we can look at how other countries are doing in this regard. The United States have a new leader. Joe Biden is heading the country, and democracy is gaining speed for a few months now, and democracy is reviving. So what are the signs of revival of the American democracy under Joe Biden? You see, America is recovering from the coronavirus pandemic, first of all, because the country was in lockdown for quite some time, and in the last few months, most people in the United States have already received their vaccination shots. The economy is growing. The economic growth is roughly 6%. and has good prospects for growth till the end of the year. There are big incentives for the growth of the American economy. The Congress enacted a number of acts to stimulate the economy and to protect the small and medium businesses from losing their opportunities, and these measures are working very effectively. And recently, President Biden announced that corruption is a matter of national security, is a priority for national security for the United States, and that is an important step linking our two countries. And clearly, the United States are going to pay a lot of attention to this dimension of the Ukrainian leadership. Sounds like a decisive action plan in action. I hope that we will soon also recover from the coronavirus, overcome it, and then all the processes in the country can pick up. This is a very promising conversation with the country leaders. I will let you moderate your studio, and I know that in the end of the panel, when you complete the conversation with your guests, we'll have a special message from Samantha Powell. Thank you. Thank you.
Joining us online. My name is Myroslava Gongadze, and I'm honored to host this panel with three of leaders and decision makers of this world. We have online today, I hope you would have them on the screen. I'm not sure yet. Are we having them already? I would like to introduce people when they are coming on the screen. Not really. I will then, we are waiting for the, okay, Maia, Sandu is already there. Hello? Unfortunately, I see them only, would they be here or not? Okay. So, she's speaking now. Okay. I couldn't hear her, but it's okay. So we have Maia Sandu, the president of Moldova. We have Věra, Jourová, vice president, European Commission. And we have Mircea, Geoană, NATO deputy secretary general. I hope we will have them all here. Welcome, welcome. So, democracy can be challenging. But this is the best way of governance of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democracy works only in fact-based society, where people have free access to information and can make educated decisions. In today's post-truth world, we are facing real threats to democratic governance from bad actors who question the facts, challenging the rule of law, and exporting corruption. We are sitting here today in Ukraine, where we can express our views freely. But in our eastern border, the Kremlin regime is poisoning their opponents and putting them in jail. We have a country on the north that beating, torturing, and murdering activists who are standing up for their rights to choose their leaders and their future. Some of them are here today with us, those who were able to escape. It is incredibly important that we gathered here today in Kyiv, because today's Kyiv feels like both a promised land and a battlefield for the future of democracy and free society. It didn't feel that way 20 years ago. My husband, Gongadze, when I left this country, my husband, Gongadze, was murdered for telling the truth to power. His sacrifice and later protest movement paved the way to two revolutions in Ukraine, Orange Revolution and Revolution of Dignity. Many more people sacrificed their lives for the dedicating to fighting for truth and democracy and European values. However, Ukraine was not able to get rid of systemic corruption. And the President of Ukraine just told us how much he does to deal with corruption. However, it's not enough. Too many people died for that. But it shows that it's easy to make, much more easier to make a revolution happen. But it's much more difficult to make sustainable change and build sustainable institution and working democracy. About all these challenges, we would talk with our decision makers and world leaders. I'm so happy they're all on our screen. And so we will kick off this 2 days conference on a high note and listen about the challenges of democracy from the top. One more time, I would introduce our guests, that we have President of Moldova, welcome. We have Věra Jourová, Vice President of European Commission, welcome. And we have Mircea, Geoană, NATO Deputy Secretary General. And I would start, hello, and I would start with President of Moldova. You're a very impressive leader, and you won election in a very, very difficult circumstances. And you were able to beat very, very strong opponent. The Moldovan embassy is down the street from my house in Washington, D.C. And I saw the lines and lines of people trying to come and vote for you. So I would like to turn to you and ask you, how are you doing? How is a progress to prosperity for Moldovians looking today?
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, I'm pleased to address you today at this international conference dedicated to safeguarding democracy and fighting corruption. I am a believer in democracy, and as you saw it in Washington, but also in many places of the world, and especially here in Moldova, I come from a country whose people cherish democracy, fight for democracy, and who want it see work for them. 30 years ago, Moldova decided to build a democratic society. We have approved laws, we created institutions, and we borrowed or tried to learn from the best European and international practices in an attempt to build a strong state which would work for the citizens, which would defend their rights and freedoms, would uphold market economy, and ensure that the rules apply to everyone equally. Unfortunately, many of these reforms were successful only on paper, despite having sophisticated laws in place, which were meant to ensure the independence of the key institutions. Most of the institutions in my country remain weak, corrupt, and prone to external influences. And the Moldovan judiciary is among the worst offenders It happens today that the corrupt schemes, including the banking sector fraud, but many others about which the entire region or even the world knows about, have happened with the contribution of judges through their illegal decisions. Bad court decisions got Moldova condemned by the European Court of Human Rights and cost our budget tens of millions of euros in damage. Corrupt judges chase our foreign investors away, and even our own citizens who flee the country looking for a better life elsewhere. And courts often fail to punish the most or the biggest corrupt people who are guilty of serious crimes. As a result, public trust in the judiciary, but also in the state, is going down. It's not an easy reform to undertake, and I did win these elections on the anti-corruption agenda, promising that I will fight for the justice sector reform and that I will fight for strengthening the capacity of the anti-corruption institutions. It's a difficult fight, but I do have the support of people. At the same time, the opposition from within the system is very, very high. We've been talking about the independence of justice, and this has been a discussion that we're having also with the international partners who are trying to help us. But it looks that we haven't been talking enough about the accountability of judges, because when you provide corrupt judges with independence, this definitely doesn't solve the issue. On the contrary, they just continue to take illegal decisions, which are helping the corrupt groups in Moldova. And what happens today in my country is that there is no one person, as it happened in the past with Plahotniuk's regime, who would control the entire system. But there are several corruption clans who just go around and try to buy the decisions of the judges. So judges can choose whom to sell the decision and how much to get for this. And of course, the state cannot compete with such corruption groups, even if the state is ready and is paying relatively good salaries in the system. So it's a difficult reform, despite the fact that, as I said, that in Moldova there is huge support on behalf of the citizens for this reform. What we see now as the next step is the extraordinary external evaluation of judges and prosecutors to eliminate all the corrupt individuals from the system. And then, of course, to strengthen the capacity and to strengthen the independence of both the justice sector and the body of prosecutors. For that, we need a parliament or a majority in the parliament which would support the laws that have to be passed to go through this extraordinary evaluation of judges and prosecutors. And we happen to have snap parliamentary elections in a few weeks. And I very much hope that the Moldovans would continue to support honest people so that we will be able to go on with these important reforms. We are trying to learn from the countries in the region. We know that many of the countries are struggling. And we also know that we need to do this reform as soon as possible, because people in Moldova, many of the people from Moldova have left the country already, and we need to restore people's trust as soon as possible in order not to see the others leaving the country, but also hoping that at least part of the diaspora will come back.
Maia, can I ask you a question in that regard? You were talking about systemic corruption in Moldova. What is the source of that corruption, and how much connection do we have between our countries, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, in exporting that corruption?
Well, Moldova is not such a rich country, but somehow the crooks find ways to extract huge amounts. For instance, the recent international study showed that the amount of the illegal financial flows in Moldova account for $1 billion annually. Maybe this is not, but I guess this is a big amount even for Ukraine. But if you compare this or put it in the context of the Moldovan size, then you will understand how much this is. And of course, there have been there are different ways the crooks get to extract people from the country. The banking sector fraud, the infamous banking sector fraud, for which, by the way, we haven't seen any results of the investigation because no one has been punished so far. This has happened 6 years ago, and no one single cent has been recovered. You can imagine how people feel here, because they do have to repay the hole created in the banking sector by this fraud. The money laundering, the Russian laundromat, I have to remind you that we speak here about tens of billions of dollars of dirty money which have been laundered through the Moldovan banks and courts. And here, our prosecution hasn't even started to investigate such a big corruption scheme. Then, of course, is the procurement, which involves corrupt civil servants who, together with some people from the private sector, manage to get money out of the state more than what their services and goods that they're selling to the state deserve. So, and then we have rider attacks on different sectors. For instance, right now, we're witnessing a rider attack on the insurance system. And things happen in a way which is difficult to imagine when the crooks, the people involved, go to the court, and then the court cancels the decisions of the regulators. It might be the decision of the central bank or the decision of the National Security Commission. So, and these are definitely illegal decisions, but because there hasn't been any punishment for illegal decisions taken towards the judges, because the prosecution is very slow at initiating cases against the judges. This keeps happening. Smuggling is a big issue, and smuggling is an issue which has to be tackled together, as money laundering has to be tackled together, because for this kind of corruption schemes, there are no borders, and we do need the cooperation of the countries in the region. And I have discussed the issue, for instance, the issue of fighting smuggling in the Transnistrian region. I've discussed it with President Zelensky, and I do count on Ukraine's support here. But also when we talk about fighting money laundering, we need the involvement of international institutions. We need the involvement of prosecutor officers in some of the European countries, because some of this money ended up there in their countries. Also, when we talk about big corruption schemes, the Moldovan crooks will buy assets again in the developed countries. This is where they like to spend their money, and here we need the assistance, the support of the institutions in the countries where the assets are, in order to trace them and to seize them and to repay the budget.
Maia, thank you so much. I really appreciate your staying with us today, unlike our president, the Ukrainian president, unfortunately. But this is a very good segue to Věra Jourová, because we are talking about support from European Union and European and other institutions. How much support can Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia can rely on from Europe in fighting corruption? Corruption is not the only issue and the only threats to democracy, but is one of the main ones.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam President Sandu, Mr. Deputy Secretary General Geoană. Very happy to be here with you today. Coming to your question, well, of course, I am happy that I can confirm that the EU will continue to assist all the mentioned countries in the fight against corruption and in the fight for strengthening the democratic structures. As Madam President said, this is not only about the laws, it is about the bringing the laws into life, and it is about the sustainable development where you cannot see any hiccups and any reverse processes which are damaging everything which had been done before. And I personally worked in Moldova and Ukraine and also in Georgia in my previous capacity as a private consultant, and I met so many very determined people, not only from public sector, especially the mayors, but also the civil society actors. And in the capacity of the Commissioner for Justice, I met also the judges and the anti-corruption teams. And I have to say that I spoke to determined, again, very determined and courageous people who need to enjoy the sustainable support from the governments, from the parliaments, and from the international community as well. So I am glad that on behalf of the EU, I can confirm today that the EU will continue to assist you. And I would really like to assist the opening and running the projects which make sense, because I remember when I was in Ukraine several years ago, I spoke to the promoters of many projects started and financed by the EU, but also by other international organizations, and it was quite obvious that they are sometimes overlapping in their work. They are sometimes offering something which is not desperately needed in the country. They are sometimes offering something which might be achieved through other ways, and what is needed is practical consultation, technical assistance, and permanent support to be available. As speaking about the international experts, to be available and to be knowledgeable, to understand the situation in the country. So I would like us to continue the practical support through well-targeted projects and well-targeted funding. And today's topic is tackling corruption. I think fight against corruption is absolutely essential, as it corrodes democracy and the rule of law, and as such serves the interests of their enemies too. And the rule of law, functioning democratic institutions, and open civic engagement are key for the democratic transformation of the region and essential for the socio-economic development. And we all know that corruption remains a serious challenge in the public and private sectors. High-level and complex corruption is in particular challenging in the region we speak about. And not only we have a lot of issues in the EU as well. I am happy that we launched on the 20th of May the EU for Integrity program for the Eastern Partnership, marking the beginning of an important cooperation between the EU, the OECD Anti-Corruption Network, and Open Government Partnership. And I am sure that together we will support the Eastern Partnership countries in their efforts in the areas of anti-corruption, civic engagement, and open development reforms. What is key is building high-quality public administration, because it's the foundation for well-functioning democracies. All state institutions must abide by the law, maintain integrity, and protect citizens, business, and investors from arbitrary decisions to exercise their rights fully. We need to ensure open civic engagement for an enhanced transparency and oversight of anti-corruption reforms implementation. Civil society organizations and independent media are absolutely vital actors in this process. And I know that Ukraine's progress in the fight against corruption was one of the key benchmarks for granting visa-free access to the EU to Ukrainian citizens, and also the plan which is under financial support programs. The right which you will be able to enjoy fully again once we are able to put the pandemic behind us. It is important not to lose your achievements going forward. The Constitutional Court decisions in the end of last year demonstrated how fragile most of the reforms are in an environment where the main court and the key judicial governance bodies remain unreformed. In order to ensure that no reform is cancelled in the future, I would like to stress the need to reform the Constitutional Court and envisage an independent and merit-based selection procedures for its judges. There is also a need to finally complete a comprehensive judicial reform which includes the reform of the judicial governance bodies. The Venice Commission has issued a number of opinions on this, and I would like to encourage you to use them as guidance. Ukraine has managed to build an entirely new anti-corruption architecture from scratch in a very short time. And this is truly impressive. The anti-corruption institutions started delivering tangible results, and corrupt officials started getting real prison sentences. As it could have been expected, as soon as the agencies started being effective, vested interests began fighting back, trying to create obstacles for effective operations. I would take it as a compliment. It means that you managed to build a functioning system. This is why it is crucial to ensure the independence of all anti-corruption agencies, starting with fair and transparent selection process of its leadership and topping with the invisibility of politicization and interference into their work. Let me also say a few words, if time allows, about the disinformation issue, because if there is something very strong, relatively new phenomenon which has the potential to sow distrust into our democracies, it's disinformation, which is always well targeted and which is always well designed to influence the people's minds. Disinformation, according to our European surveys and many data which we are collecting, poses a continuous threat to our democracies. It erodes trust in institutions, in governments and the media, and harms our democracies by hampering an ability of citizens to take informed decisions based on reliable information. The threat cuts across different policy areas. Disinformation has been used in the context of migration, to increase divides on the climate change debate, to suppress participation in the electoral process. It has also been a key component of the hybrid warfare that Ukraine is subjected to. Also in the European Union, we see continued pro-Kremlin disinformation that aims to subvert our democratic processes and, in the context of the current pandemic, also our public health efforts. The EU takes the threat posed by foreign information manipulation and interference very seriously. We have for many years increased our efforts to tackle this challenge, which poses a threat to our social cohesion and security. That is why. Yes.
Go on.
Yeah. No, I know I speak too long. So just one sentence on how our East Stratcom task force works since 2015. This task force has consistently tracked, analyzed, and exposed Russian disinformation targeting Ukraine. The EU versus disinfo public debates contain over 4,300 examples of pro-Kremlin disinformation about Ukraine. The team has exposed systematic, disinformation campaign aiming to undermine democratic reforms and elections in Ukraine, and most recently also to justify the Russian military built up along the Ukrainian borders. So we are vigilant, we are working against disinformation in Europe, but we are also monitoring the situation in Ukraine based on the cooperation with Ukraine. We have a cooperation with the United States and the NATO, so it will be very interesting to see, to hear what the Deputy Secretary General will say about, maybe also about the fight against disinformation. I had much longer speech prepared, but I know I speak too long.
We will have more questions, so be ready. We have still 30 minutes to go, and I actually appreciate that you address the issue of the source of disinformation. This is very important to name the issue straight, directly, to deal with the issue. So when we realize where the source of the problem, we can actually fix the problem, possibly. I would like to then turn to Mircea, Geoană. Thank you so much for waiting patiently for half an hour. And I would probably ask you about the challenges. United States said that China is the main challenge and main national security threats for United States. How do you see the main security threats for NATO countries today? And do you agree that China is the main threat?
Okay, thank you, Myroslava. Thank you for having me. And it's not a matter of speaking after President Maia Sandu and also to listen, like always, very carefully to what Věra Jourová, my dear colleague and friend from the European Commission, had to say. I was really impressed by Maia Sandu's very, very direct and engaging approach to the challenges that her country is facing in this very important topic. Listen, before answering your question, let me say a little bit where we are coming from in NATO when it comes to the very topic of this very important conference. And I really congratulate President Zelensky and all of you for organizing such an important event. I will start with Russia because that's something which is so actual and so persistent. And Russia's pattern of aggressive actions, including its military activity in around Ukraine in the broader region, are deeply concerning. And NATO allies have repeatedly called on Russia to end its military buildup and stop fueling conflict in eastern Ukraine. We do not and will not recognize Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea. Also, allied ministers discussed these challenges posed by Russia when they met virtually last week. This will also be on the agenda of the summit of NATO leaders this 1 week from now, next Monday, and will continue as NATO to provide significant practical support to Ukraine so that it can better provide for its own security. So, of course, we are speaking about strengthening capabilities, training Ukrainian armed forces, stepping up our cooperation in the greater Black Sea region, exercises, sports visits, and of course, supporting, and that's coming closer to the topic of today's conference, supporting Ukraine's wide-ranging reform agenda, which will make Ukraine more resilient and help advance this country's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. I just personally met, I think, a few days ago, Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, Deputy Prime Minister Resnikov, Foreign Minister Kuleba was with us just 3 weeks ago. Secretary General Stoltenberg is in regular contact with President Zelensky. So our dialogue is very robust and our close partnership and cooperation are more vibrant and getting more vibrant every day. But let me tell you something closer to this topic. I have a personal commitment and interest in this topic. because I'm coming from Romania, and I know very well, and I remember vividly the dark days of communism. So cherishing freedom and the right of nations to choose their own destiny is something which is very much embedded in what I believe, and I believe all of us believe in our region. I also know that freedom cannot be taken for granted. That's a struggle that continues every day. Democracy is a perfectible endeavor. And this is why we are determined not to allow anyone under any disguise to disrupt or weaken our democracies and way of life. And here with Věra Jourová and the European Commission, we are doing a lot of work on fighting disinformation together. Our professional colleagues are working together. I know that there is also talk and active cooperation also with a strategic communication group of the G7. By the way, this will be the first big event of the series of high-level engagement that President Biden will be having in the next few days. So we are ready to work with like-minded organizations. EU is our strategic partner to really work on this very important matter. But let me also say something about not only, President Maia Sandu referred to something which is exceptionally important. How can we really build good governance, professional civil servants, well-trained and performant members of our judiciaries, mainly for countries that do not have a great tradition into this? There is a certain embedded weakness, a certain also history and geography are not very generous with the countries in this region. So this is a challenge that sometimes we have to really understand and help these countries much, much better. Because there is no way in which any nation in this world will be ever able to thrive unless we have a good public service, transparent, accountable, public service, until we have credible, effective, and accountable judiciary, until we build, not easy, checks and balances just to make sure that there is mutual control amongst the powers of the state, and more importantly than anything else, that we gain or regain or don't lose the trust of our own citizens. This is why this topic of corruption, of good governance, is such a critically important conversation. In NATO jargon, we call this building integrity. We have a massive program. Ukraine, Georgia, the Republic of Moldova are all part in this conversation, and this because we say as NATO that if we build integrity at the core, at the hard core of a country's system, which is national defense, national security, and related hardcore institutions. At that moment, the foundation of a broader effort to fight corruption, to have good governance, to have accountable public service will become much easier. This is something that we are interested in continuing to engage. We are welcoming the interest of your countries in doing more with us. And I'm convinced that speaking of the Republic of Moldova is a joint partner of both NATO and the EU. So I think we have so many things we can do together. As some of you have mentioned before, this is also poor governance is not only a major obstacle towards prosperity, democracy, and a better future for our people, but is also, in a way, a huge strategic and national security vulnerability. Because this is something that, on the one side, domestically, internally, is corroding the public trust of people, thus making the reforms of the leaders more difficult to be obtained, but is also used and abused by malign actors from the outside, and I mentioned Russia already, could be others, that are trying to make sure that this kind of discontent, this kind of dysfunction is amplified, becomes a political issue, thus discrediting in their mind the desire of these countries to join the West. So this is, at the same time, a massively important domestic issue. There's no way forward. There is no prosperity. There's no real democracy. There is no real future. There's no real future for our kids and grandkids without a properly run state. That's a domestic issue. And at the other side, this is a massive strategic weakness. It's also a reputational weakness, speaking of foreign investment, speaking of attracting private capital, allowing your domestic SMEs to thrive. It's very difficult to thrive when the reputation of one place is not attractive enough for capital and for investments. So this is where we are coming as an organization. We are fully behind the efforts of President Zelensky and his government in taking this issue. I remember visiting Kiev with the Secretary General Stoltenberg and the North Atlantic Council, and Odessa, by the way, how the president was telling us before the pandemic about the turbo reforms. And I'm really heartened, and I can only encourage from here, from the NATO headquarters, we are preparing outside of the studio for the NATO summit next Monday, for you to persevere, for you to have faith, for you to really continue to fight corruption, and thus maximize the chances of Euro-Atlantic integration. This is not about benchmarking or checking boxes in something that some people from Brussels or elsewhere are telling you what to do. This is fundamentally important for your own progress, for your own destiny, and at the same time minimizing a significant strategic and security risk to all of you. So persevere. We are here to be of support. And I'm absolutely convinced that when you have political leadership that is credible, determined, and relentlessly pushing forward this agenda, results would come, and the dreams of your people will become a reality.
Thank you so much. Since you brought the issue of integration, it's a logical question. When Ukraine, Georgia, and those who are inspiring to be in NATO would receive the membership action plan. This was the issue of 2008, when Ukraine was denied that plan or were not ready to do that. And fortunately, we have 2021 today, and we are still on a path to, Ukraine still on a path to receive the plan. Do we have any timeline for this? And is NATO ready to welcome Ukraine and Georgia?
Okay, I'll give you the official answer, which is the same we have been given to President Zelensky, to the leadership of Ukraine. This is something we are talking to our Georgian partners. This is basically standard policy here in NATO. The open door policy is solid, it's here, and is real. And our leaders at the summit in 1 week from now will reconfirm the open door policy. I'm also saying that we are an organization of 30 nations working by consensus. So before moving to one decision, we need to have consensus, and today we don't have consensus on this one. Thirdly, it is my strong plea that I'm making every single time. I'm doing this again today. I mentioned my country, Romania. When we were basically trying to find our way as a nation after the fall of communism, in the mid and late 90s, we decided with all of us to join the West, to join NATO, to join the European Union. And I have to say that initially not that many people gave Romania a significant chance to be eventually there. I remember I was ambassador in Washington in 1999. We failed to get an invitation to join the first round of enlargement. And we played, in a way, if you want, or overplayed or misplayed, also public opinion expectations. We built so much expectation for that summit that when it didn't happen, we had to manage domestically a massive public communication problem. So and then look at my country, Romania. Look at where I'm speaking to you now, or from what position I'm speaking to you now. The first leader from the new NATO members to have such a big position in NATO. I'm just saying that if you stay the course, if you do your domestic reforms not for the sake of getting into one or another organization, but for the sake of your own people, and you really continue to invest in your Western destiny, what I call the Western Boulevard, this is the only way to move forward. This is something that will bring results. Timetable, now, tomorrow, I don't know. But I know that when a nation is really believing in destiny, and when NATO will never accept the old European curse of spheres of influence and some power denying another European country which destiny one country should choose, this is something that NATO will never accept, will never agree upon, because that's the difference between NATO, I believe it's true for the European Union, I know it's true for the European Union, and the kind of realpolitik and zero-sum game and spheres of influence that others are playing. So stay the course. Continue to reform domestically. Continue to push for your people. Continue to push for Western integration. So if you look to the example of my home country, Romania, keep fighting. Keep moving forward.
Thank you so much. Obviously, Ukraine and other countries have to do their homework. Georgia is already reformed its military and much closer in that reform agenda, and much closer to getting that membership action plan. So it's a call for Ukrainian leadership to do their job today. I would like to address one more precious issue of today. It's Belarus. We saw what President Lukashenko, what we call him president at this point, Lukashenko did to its citizens who are standing up for the right to choose their leaders. EU is reluctant to put a stronger sanctions on Lukashenko regime. And still, yes, they closed the airspace after this hijacking of the plane and capturing one of the activists and his partner. However, what is EU and NATO prepared to do to stop this horrible events happening in our neighboring country? Actually, this is a question to all of you, and maybe Maia Sandu would have her idea of what has to be done. Nina, maybe you will start? I'm not sure they're hearing my question. Did you hear my question?
I do hear your question.
Oh,
it was not clear who is expected to answer first. The questions were about the EU. I can tell you that, of course, we're very concerned with what happens in Belarus, and we really hope that the international partners will find a way to get the innocent people released and to stop the actions, the illegal actions that happen. I mean, with the people who are trying to defend their freedom and the democracy. And to us, this is a lesson. This is a lesson that we should work very hard not to allow an authoritarian regime to get deep roots, because then it's very difficult to fight it. And I see as my main task actually to contribute to strengthen the democratic institutions and to strengthen the democratic processes so that the country does never get into such issues. Of course, we don't have full-fledged democracy. We're very far from the Western democratic standards. But the little democracy we have managed to build, we value it, we cherish it. And we have to build those independent and strong institutions and have the proper processes to make sure that human rights will never be attacked, and that people will have their rights and freedoms ensured. And again, we very much share the concerns, and we very much hope that the people will be released, and that this bad things won't continue.
Věra, do you have something to say? Except, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, what the president has just said, yes, we have to hope, but we have to push. And you could see a very strong reaction of the leaders, who had the summit just one day after Alexander Lukashenko's regime hijacking the plane. And all the leaders used very strong language. Ursula von der Leyen said that this is the attack against European sovereignty and against the European people and against the freedoms, including the freedom of media, because Roman Protasevich belonged to the courageous Belarusian journalists who were writing critical articles and using the social media to open the eyes of everyone to understand better what kind of regime is Lukashenko's regime. And now we also Roman Protasevich speaking to Belarusian public TV. In my view, he must have been tortured. His declarations are obviously pushed and forced. This is something my country remembers from the 50s. In Czechoslovakia, we had the political prisoners and political executions. So for me, this is really horrible to see such outrageous behavior of the obviously authoritarian regime, which is nowadays Belarus. What can we do? We cannot invade. We cannot use military forces. We can use diplomatic measures and instruments. We can increase the pressure through the sanctions. We can enlarge the sanctions list. We should put on the sanction list everyone influential who is supporting Lukashenko's regime. In my view, we have not exhausted yet the possibility of using economic sanctions. But at the same time, of course, we have to be mindful of not making the life of Belarusian citizens more difficult than it is now by or through the economic sanctions. So this is still the process. I think that EU showed very clearly that the behavior of Lukashenko's regime is intolerable, and that we will use the tools we have in hand and continue the push, continue the funding, which is so difficult to get to the people who need the funding and financial support. We already deployed several tens of millions euro to help the families of the imprisoned Belarusian citizens. We are now pushing on releasing not only those who are the political prisoners, but especially the young people, because there are children also in Belarusian prisons. So coming back to the money, we try to find the best ways and safe ways how to send the money to those who need it. But it's not easy, and I would really like us to do more to help Belarusian people to sustain in their protest and to be strong under very difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you. Mrs. Geoană.
Listen, NATO is a military defensive alliance, and you have seen, I'm convinced, the very unequivocal statements from the Secretary General, the statement of the North Atlantic Council, and the fact that we are very vigilant to the situation in this country. Also, I have to say that when one is looking for reactions and actions, I think we should look at the political West, not as NATO, EU, but also as what all of us are doing. The statement's very clear from the US administration. the very strong statements and gestures from neighbors of Belarus in Poland or Lithuania and in the region, anticipating the same strong language when it comes to G7 or the NATO meetings or the EU and so on and so forth. But if we are looking to this issue with condemnation, these are intolerable actions. We're also looking to a smaller portion of the bigger struggle between democracies and authoritarian regimes. That's in fact what's going on right now. And the fact that it's on the very border of both NATO and EU is also something which is very significant to all of us. We're also looking to the way in which the independence and sovereignty of Belarus could be undermined because of the situation that we are now witnessing in Russia and the Union state. So that's a very complex issue that has on the one side a moral dimension. There's democracy, the right of people to peacefully protest, the right of people to speak up their minds, the right of civil aviation to fly in open and safe skies all over the world and all over Europe. But it's also something bigger, which is both strategic and, if you want, ideological, the struggle between our democratic countries and authoritarian regimes. So that's a very important topic for us here at NATO. Of course, we know the division of labor, we are a defensive military alliance, but I know that together, as the political West, we'll be able to really do the right thing and persevere.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this words, and thank you, our panelists. We are summarizing this panel today. It was very important to hear your positions on many topics. We did not touch every topic, obviously. It's almost impossible. Maybe one more. We have like 2 minutes for the finish line. To the finish line. So the Biden-Putin meeting in Geneva on 16. What to expect and what would you like to hear from both leaders?
If I may start.
Yes, we have 3 minutes for all of you. 1 minute.
It's important they will speak to each other, but I will speak on just from my personal point of view. I don't have big expectations.
Thank you.
Sandu, I think.
Yes, well, I mentioned what a challenging agenda we have in Moldova, and what we want is to have peace and a non-conflictual environment around ourselves so that we could focus on our internal reforms, that we could build our strong institutions, which would make the state less vulnerable, including to the external threats. So we live in a very complex and difficult region, and this is very concerning. But what we want peace, and we hope not to have any conflicts around, so that we could focus on building democracy in Moldova.
As you can imagine, I'm looking at this meeting in Geneva from a strategic standpoint. I'm convinced that President Biden will be very direct in naming the destabilizing and aggressive actions of Russia in so many directions, in so many geographies, and in so many domains. At the same time, I know, and this is good for strategic stability, if you want, to also discuss and engage with Russia on arms control, on nuclear strategic balance, on climate change, things that we need to fight together around the world. So I do believe there will be a meeting that will be straightforward, at the same time trying to find the ways in which we can engage Russia more constructively, if they want to engage with us more constructively.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you. And we will move on for our next guest, very, very special guest.